The arrows fell like rain on a winter morning in Poland, watched in horror as Mongol horsemen circled their flanks. They had never seen anything like this. Warriors who could fire arrows backward while retreating at full gallop, who moved across the frozen earth as if born to it. The knights had thought their heavy armor and European tactics would protect them. They were wrong. Within hours, half the Hungarian population would be dead, Bulgaria would fall, and Europe would stand defenseless before the greatest empire the world had ever seen. But to understand how these warriors came to threaten the very heart of Christendom, we must travel back 4 decades to a tent in Mongolia, where the clan that had once followed his father abandoned him, his mother, and his siblings to die on the harsh plains. They took the horses, the wealth, everything. Most children would have perished. Temujin did not. He spent his teenage years in poverty, learning lessons that would reshape the world. He learned that blood ties meant nothing without power to enforce them. He learned that survival required cunning, ruthlessness, and an ability to inspire loyalty in others. And he learned to hate the system that had abandoned him, a system where incompetent nobles ruled simply because of their ancestry, while talented commoners had no chance to rise. He offered something revolutionary, a meritocracy. A foot soldier who proved himself in battle could become a general. A nobody with administrative skills could govern provinces. In Temujin's growing band of warriors, what mattered was not who your grandfather was, but what you could do today. This radical approach attracted the ambitious, the talented, the overlooked. Warriors who had been passed over for promotion because they lacked noble blood flocked to his banner. Administrators tired of serving incompetent lords joined his cause. And Temujin rewarded them lavishly, creating a core of supporters who owed everything to him. Together they conquered the Orkhon Valley in the 1190s. This wasn't just any territory. The valley controlled vital trade routes, provided rich grazing lands, and held deep religious significance. Mongol tradition held that whoever ruled the Orkhon Valley could build great empires. Temujin believed it. Over the next decade, he systematically destroyed the clans that had wronged him. The Tatars, the Merkits, the Naimans, one by one, they fell. But Temujin didn't simply slaughter his enemies. That would have been wasteful. Instead, he absorbed them. Enemy warriors became his warriors. Enemy princesses married into his family. Enemy chieftains became his vassals. And through his system of forced integration, their people became Mongols. The method was ingenious. When Temujin conquered a tribe, he broke it apart. Families from the defeated tribe were scattered throughout Mongol hordes, their tents placed between Mongol tents. Surrounded by Mongols unable to practice their own customs, the conquered people gradually adopted Mongol ways. Their children grew up speaking Mongol, thinking like Mongols, becoming Mongols, becoming Mongols. Within a generation, entire tribes disappeared, not through Ironically, Temujin had learned this technique from the Turks when he conquered them. He had no problem adopting useful practices from other cultures. If it worked, he used it. This flexibility would become a hallmark of Mongol expansion. By 1206, Temujin controlled more territory than any Mongol in history. The remaining clan leaders faced a choice: fight him and probably lose, or submit and survive. At a great assembly that year, they made their decision. They crowned Temujin as Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, founding what would become the largest. First, ensure only his descendants could rule the empire. By restricting the succession to his bloodline, he prevented random ambitious generals from starting civil wars over the throne. Second, secure the borders by conquering all neighbors. After all, your neighbor can't invade you if you've already invaded them. But this created a problem. Conquered peoples tend to rebel. Genghis Khan's solution was the assimilation process described earlier, combined with generous rewards for cooperation. Tribes that submitted peacefully kept their leaders, received shares of plunder from future conquests, and gained position. A single horde could number anywhere from a few hundred to tens of thousands of people. It included warriors, yes, but also families, craftsmen, herders, and vast herds of cattle and horses. Each horde was self-sufficient, able to survive on the steppes indefinitely. When grass ran out in one area, the entire horde would pack up and migrate to new pastures. This mobility would prove crucial in Mongol military success. With Mongolia united, Genghis Khan turned his attention to richer prizes. To the south lay China, divided among several kingdoms. The nearest was the Jin dynasty, controlled, but Genghis Khan fought like no one the Jin had ever faced. Most armies couldn't campaign in winter. The logistics of feeding troops when snow covered everything proved impossible. But Mongols were born in Siberian winters. They knew how to find food when others starved. So, Genghis Khan invaded in winter when Jin armies huddled in their cities and fortresses. The Mongol strategy was simple but devastatingly effective. Avoid direct battle with large Jin armies. Instead, use superior mobility to attack isolated garrisons and cities. If a Jin army approached, the Mongols would mount their horses, and their cavalry and infantry could never catch the Mongols, never fight back effectively. They could only watch helplessly as the Mongols destroyed their empire piece by piece. Between 1211 and 1215, Genghis Khan conquered most of northern Jin territory. Cities that resisted were destroyed utterly, their populations massacred as warnings to others. Cities that surrendered were spared, their administrators incorporated into the Mongol bureaucracy. The message was clear: submit or die. With northern China secured, Genghis Khan pivoted west to Central Asia. Here lay the Qara-Khitai Empire, the Uyghur Khaganate, and the Khwarezmian Empire. Their literacy and administrative skills filled a crucial gap, since most Mongols couldn't read or write. The Qara-Khitai fought and lost in 1218. Then came the Khwarezmian Empire, stretching across Central Asia and Persia. What happened next demonstrated both Mongol diplomatic tactics and their capacity for total war. Genghis Khan sent merchants to Khwarezmia as a gesture of peace. The local governor, suspecting them of being spies, executed them and seized their goods. Genghis Khan demanded the governor be punished. The Khwarezmian Shah refused, instead killing the Mongol ambassadors sent to negotiate. Now he would wage righteous war. The Mongol invasion of Khwarezmia between 1219 and 1221 showcased their military genius. They didn't just defeat armies, they destroyed the very concept of resistance. Cities that surrendered immediately were spared. Cities that resisted even briefly faced systematic destruction. The Mongols would divert rivers to flood cities, use captured civilians as human shields, and employ Chinese siege engineers to breach walls thought impregnable. At Nishapur, where a Mongol prince had been killed, the revenge was apocalyptic. After capturing the city, the Mongols reportedly killed. But the Mongols weren't mindless destroyers. They were pragmatic conquerors. In territories they occupied, Genghis Khan installed competent local administrators rather than Mongol governors. Why? Because Mongols lived in nomadic hordes and had no interest in settling in cities. They wanted tribute and obedience, not direct rule. This created a vast, multicultural bureaucracy. Chinese gunpowder experts moved to Central Asia. Uyghur administrators governed Persian provinces. Persian engineers served in Mongolia. Trade flourished along newly secured routes. A merchant could travel from Korea to Eastern Europe with Mongol protection, creating unprecedented economic integration. The bureaucracy operated on a system of collective decision-making. When any major decision needed to be made, declaring war, undertaking large construction projects, appointing important officials, the relevant administrators would meet and discuss. Decisions required consensus. This meant everyone had to cooperate, building networks of mutual obligation throughout the empire. The glue holding everything together was plunder. Mongol conquests generated enormous wealth. Those leaders would then distribute wealth to their subordinates, who would distribute it further down the chain. Eventually, every loyal subject received a share. This system incentivized expansion. To keep subjects loyal, leaders needed to keep distributing wealth. To get wealth, they needed successful conquests. To have successful conquests, they needed loyal subjects. It was a cycle that demanded constant growth. By 1227, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific Ocean. And then, within weeks of each other, both Genghis Khan's eldest son Jochi and Genghis Khan himself died. The succession crisis. All the major leaders of the empire traveled to Mongolia for a Kurultai, a great assembly to elect the next Khan. The decision had to be unanimous. It took 2 years. Finally, in 1229, they elected Genghis Khan's third son, Ugadai. The delay might seem problematic, but it actually demonstrated the system's legitimacy. Everyone had a voice. Everyone had to agree. When Ugadai finally became Khan, he ruled with the consent of the entire Mongol elite. Ugadai recognized that the empire had grown too large for one man to manage. He divided. The Golden Horde went to Jochi's sons, governing the western steppes and Russia. The Chagatai Khanate went to Genghis Khan's second son Chagatai, ruling Central Asia. Ugadai kept Mongolia, northern China, and Persia for himself. Ugadai's first years were spent crushing rebellions from those who had hoped Mongol unity would die with Genghis Khan. They were wrong. The Mongols remained as formidable as ever. Ugadai then continued expansion on multiple fronts. He ordered the Golden Horde to invade Eastern Europe. He commanded his forces in Persia to complete the conquest of the Middle East. He sent the Chagatai Khan, and he personally oversaw the final destruction of the Jin dynasty in 1234. But Ugadai's greatest legacy wasn't military. He established a standardized bureaucratic system across the empire, conducted the first empire-wide census, and began transforming the Mongol Empire from a collection of hordes into an actual state. He died in 1241, having ruled for 12 years. The next Khan, Guyuk, was elected in 1246 after another 5-year power struggle. He continued Ugadai's administrative reforms, attempting to standardize governance across the empire's diverse territories. But he died after only 2 years. Under Mongol expansion reached its greatest extent. In the Middle East, they conquered Baghdad in 1258, ending the Abbasid Caliphate that had ruled the Islamic world for 5 centuries. In China, they conquered the Dali Kingdom. In Korea and Vietnam, they established tributary relationships. In Russia, they completed their conquest of all significant principalities. The Mongols began to believe their own propaganda, one world, one ruler. They saw themselves as destined to conquer the entire globe. For a brief moment, it seemed possible. The Asian trade routes were safer than ever. The succession crisis that followed wasn't just a political dispute, it was a civil war. After 5 years of fighting, Kublai Khan emerged victorious in 1264. But his victory was Pyrrhic. The other Khanates refused to recognize his authority. Kublai had always been fascinated by Chinese culture, had surrounded himself with Chinese advisors, had adopted Chinese governmental practices. To the other Mongols, he seemed more Chinese than Mongol. Moreover, each Khanate wanted to expand in different directions. The Golden Horde wanted to conquer Western. Kublai wanted to complete the conquest of China. These goals were incompatible. In 1266, the Mongol Empire effectively split into 4 independent empires. They remained connected by culture, trade, and occasional cooperation. But the unified empire Genghis Khan had built was finished. Kublai Khan, having lost most of his empire, focused entirely on China. In 1267, he moved his capital to Beijing, abandoning the Mongol steppes for a Chinese palace. In 1271, he renamed his empire the Yuan dynasty, a completely Chinese name. Kublai adopted Chinese court rituals, Chinese governmental structures, Chinese everything. He completed the conquest of the Song dynasty in 1279, unifying China under Mongol rule for the first time. He invaded Korea, Myanmar, and Tibet, establishing a tributary empire. His most famous military adventure was the attempted invasion of Japan. Kublai sent threatening letters to the Japanese emperor, demanding submission. When Japan refused, he invaded in 1274 with a fleet of 900 ships. A typhoon destroyed much of his fleet. Undeterred, he tried. The word would take on new meaning in World War II, but its origin lay in Mongol hubris. The failed Japanese invasions exposed a crucial limitation. The Mongols couldn't cross oceans. Their military genius was land-based. Ships and naval warfare remained beyond their expertise. This created a crisis. The Mongol system depended on continuous conquest to generate plunder for distribution. But Kublai had reached the limits of expansion. He couldn't conquer Japan. He couldn't conquer Southeast Asia's jungles. He couldn't cross the Pacific. So where would new wealth come from? Kublai's solution was to rebuild China's infrastructure. If he couldn't conquer new territories, he could increase the productivity of territories he already held. He oversaw massive construction projects, canals, roads, agricultural improvements. He sent Chinese settlers to Mongolia to establish towns and farms, making Mongolia itself more productive. But this required centralized power. The traditional Mongol system, where each region governed itself with minimal central interference, couldn't coordinate large infrastructure projects. So Kublai adopted the Chinese imperial. The Mongol population split. Some moved into cities and became Chinese. Their descendants live in China today, their Mongol identity diluted beyond recognition. Others retreated to Mongolia, maintaining nomadic traditions. The Yuan dynasty's end came through natural disaster and rebellion. In the 1350s, floods devastated the countryside. The Black Death swept through, killing millions. The Mongol government continued demanding tribute regardless of whether people could pay. Starvation spread. Rebellions erupted across China. Unlike military forces which the Mongols could defeat, these were popular uprisings involving millions of civilians. Local governors joined the rebels, declaring independence. The Mongol military could win battles but couldn't occupy a hostile population. In 1368, the Mongol hordes made a pragmatic decision. They packed up and went home to Mongolia. Without military support, the Yuan dynasty collapsed into multiple successor states. The Mongol conquest of China was over. Meanwhile, the Golden Horde faced different challenges. After conquering Russia, Germany's defenses were broken. Nothing stood between the Mongols and Western Europe. Then, in 1242, they received news. Genghis Khan had died. The Mongol generals needed to return to Mongolia for the succession Kurultai. So they turned around and went home, leaving Europe traumatized but unconquered. The Golden Horde never seriously attempted to conquer Western Europe again. There were practical reasons. Western Europe had too many rivers, mountains, and forests, terrain unsuitable for Mongol cavalry tactics. More importantly, the Golden Horde faced threats from other Mongol khanates. Unable to expand further, the Golden Horde turned inward. Different Mongol clans began fighting for dominance. These internal conflicts created opportunities for Russian princes, who played Mongol factions against each other. A Russian prince might support one Mongol clan against another in exchange for reduced tribute, more territory, or marriage alliances. Over time, the Russians became essential to Mongol power struggles. Mongol leaders needed Russian support to win civil wars. This gave Russians increasing leverage. They used it to build up their territories, constructing roads, founding settlements. This violated a fundamental principle. Only Genghis Khan's descendants could rule. With none left, anyone could claim the throne. The resulting chaos fractured the Golden Horde into competing factions. Some Mongols simply gave up and returned to Mongolia. Others declared independence, forming smaller khanates. Meanwhile, the Russian principalities united under Moscow's leadership. In 1480, Moscow declared independence and defeated the remaining Mongol forces. The Golden Horde's remnants survived for centuries as smaller khanates. Russia spent the next 3 centuries conquering them, finally absorbing the last. The Crimea, the Ilkhanate, ruling Persia and the Middle East, faced unique challenges. Founded in 1256, it controlled vast territory, but little of it was suitable for Mongol hordes. Most was desert, mountain, or sea terrain where horses couldn't graze. This limited where hordes could travel, making it difficult to maintain control over distant cities. The Ilkhanate also faced constant warfare with neighbors. They couldn't expand into the Mediterranean because Arab armies used camels, which terrified Mongol horses. They couldn't expand into Russia because the Golden Horde blocked them. The resulting poverty caused more fighting in a vicious cycle. The death blow came in 1335 when the Khan died, leaving only one child, a daughter. Women couldn't rule. They searched for male relatives but found none suitable. The Black Death had killed potential heirs. Rivals fought over the throne. By 1335, the Ilkhanate had dissolved into multiple states. Mongol rule over Persia ended. The Chagatai Khanate lasted longest, ruling Central Asia from 1227 to 1755. Central Asia's vast grasslands were perfect for Mongol hordes. The Chagatai Mongols gradually integrated with local populations over 5 centuries. They adopted local customs, converted to Islam, settled in cities. By the time the Qing dynasty conquered them in 1755, they were barely recognizable as Mongols. But the Chagatai Khanate produced one final conqueror, Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane. Though not a descendant of Genghis Khan, Timur claimed Mongol heritage through marriage. Between 1370 and his death in 425, he conquered Persia, Central Asia, and parts of India, building the Timurid Empire. His descendant Babur, they had spread gunpowder from China to Europe, changing warfare forever. They had facilitated unprecedented cultural exchange along the Silk Road. They had spread Islam across Asia. They had created governmental systems that influenced Russia, China, Persia, and India for centuries. They had demonstrated that merit-based systems could outperform aristocratic ones. They had proven that mobile, flexible forces could defeat larger, more advanced armies through superior tactics. But perhaps their greatest legacy was proving that nomadic peoples could build empires rivaling or exceeding those of settled civilizations. Their genetic legacies to teen. Studies suggest Genghis Khan has roughly 16 million direct male descendants alive today. Their cultural legacy persists in the nations they conquered and created. From a 9-year-old orphan on the Mongolian steppes to an empire spanning from Korea to Poland, the Mongols reshaped human history through military genius, administrative innovation, and sheer determination. Their rise demonstrated what ruthless competence could achieve. Their fall demonstrated that even the greatest empires are temporary. If you found this story fascinating and want to explore more about what happened next, the rise of Russia, the Mughal Empire, the Mongol story, however, didn't truly end with the collapse of their empires. What they left behind transformed the world in ways that still echo today. To understand the full scope of their legacy, we need to examine what changed forever because of their conquests. Before the Mongols, the world was divided into isolated regions. China knew little of Europe. Europe knew almost nothing of China. The Middle East traded with both, but served more as a barrier than a bridge. The Silk Road existed, yes, but it was dangerous, fragmented, controlled by dozens of kingdoms that each demanded tribute and offered little protection. The result was that ideas, technologies, and goods moved slowly, if at all. The Mongols changed everything. At its height, the Mongol Empire created a single political entity stretching from Korea to Poland. A merchant with Mongol papers could travel this entire distance under one government's protection. The Mongols established way stations every 20 miles along major routes, providing food, shelter, and fresh horses. They created a postal system that could deliver messages from one end of the empire to the other in weeks rather than months. They ruthlessly suppressed banditry not out of moral concern, but because bandits disrupted trade. Chinese silk reached European markets in volumes never before seen. Persian carpets appeared in Chinese palaces. Indian spices flavored Mongol feasts in Russia. The economic integration was revolutionary, but more important than goods were ideas. Technologies that had been confined to one region suddenly spread across the continent. Gunpowder, invented in China, had been used primarily for fireworks and primitive weapons. The Mongols encountered it during their conquest of the Jin dynasty and immediately recognized its military potential. They brought Chinese gunpowder. Persian metallurgists, with their advanced metalworking techniques, created better cannons and guns than the Chinese originals. When the Mongols invaded Eastern Europe, they brought these weapons with them. European smiths saw them, studied captured examples, and began producing their own versions. By the 14th century, European armies were using cannons. By the 15th century, European firearms technology had advanced beyond anything in Asia. The guns that would enable European colonial expansion originated in China but reached Europe through Mongol intermediaries. The same pattern repeated with other European innovations traveled back to Asia. The Mongols didn't invent these technologies, but they created the conditions for unprecedented technological exchange. Medicine followed similar patterns. The Mongols themselves had relatively primitive medical knowledge, but they encountered sophisticated medical traditions in every region they conquered. Chinese medicine, with its emphasis on herbal remedies and acupuncture. Persian medicine, building on Greek and Islamic traditions. Indian, Ayurvedic medicine with its complex theories of bodily humors. The Mongols, ever pragmatic, adopted useful practices from all of them. Medical texts were translated from Chinese to Persian to Arabic to Latin, spreading medical knowledge across continents. The result was a medical revolution, with each tradition enriching the others. The exchange wasn't always beneficial. The Black Death, which killed roughly 1/3 of Europe's population in the 14th century, spread along Mongol trade routes. The disease originated in Central Asia, where it had existed in rodent populations for centuries. Local populations had developed some immunity. But as Mongol trade caravans moved between cities, they carried infected fleas in their goods. The disease spread from Central Asia to the succession crises that fractured the empire were partly caused by the Black Death killing potential heirs. The rebellions that ended Mongol rule in China were partly triggered by plague-induced famines. The collapse of the Ilkhanate coincided with the plague's devastation of Persia. In a bitter irony, the same trade networks that had been the Mongol Empire's greatest strength became the vector for a disease that contributed to its downfall. But the cultural exchange went beyond technology and disease. The Mongols facilitated unprecedented movement of people across Eurasia. Chinese artisans moved to Persia. Each brought their culture, their language, their ideas. This created cosmopolitan cities unlike anything seen before. Sarai, capital of the Golden Horde, was home to Russians, Mongols, Persians, Chinese, and Europeans, all living side by side. Karakoram, the Mongol capital before Kublai Khan moved to Beijing, hosted Buddhist temples, Muslim mosques, Christian churches, and Taoist shrines within the same city. The Mongols, having no strong religious identity of their own, tolerated all religions as long as they didn't threaten Mongol power. This religious tolerance was revolutionary for its time. The Mongols didn't care what gods you worshipped as long as you paid tribute and obeyed Mongol law. This tolerance had practical benefits. It attracted talented individuals regardless of their faith. A skilled Persian Muslim administrator could rise to high office in the Mongol government, even though most Mongols practiced shamanism. A Chinese Buddhist engineer could work on projects in Persia. A European Christian merchant could trade freely in Mongol markets. Merit mattered more than faith. The Mongol governmental system itself influenced the nations that succeeded them. The Yuan dynasty's administrative structure became the foundation for Ming dynasty governance. When the Ming overthrew the Yuan, they kept much of this system, recognizing its effectiveness. In Russia, Mongol influence was even more profound. The Russian principalities had been fragmented, feudal states before the Mongol rule. They were forced to cooperate, to pay tribute to a central authority, to accept a hierarchy of power. When Moscow eventually united Russia and expelled the Mongols, it adopted a governmental structure, remarkably similar to the Mongol system, centralized, autocratic, with power flowing from the top down. The Russian tax system was based on Mongol models. The Russian postal system copied Mongol courier networks. Even the Timurid Empire, the Mongol administrative practices, the Nam, the Mongol foundations, even though Timur himself claimed to be restoring Mongol glory rather than creating something new. The Mughal Empire in India was explicitly Mongol in origin. The name Mughal art, architecture, literature, and Gaul. The Mughals brought Mongol influences. Bhopalad Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan. The Mongol military legacy extended far beyond, since they came from Central Asia and Indian traditions, creating a unique synthesis. Mughal art, architecture, literature, and governance all showed Mongol influences. Their use of terror as a weapon, destroying cities that resisted to encourage others to surrender, became a common practice in subsequent centuries. But perhaps their most important military legacy was proving that traditional feudal armies were obsolete. The Mongols had defeated every major power of their era: the Jin dynasty, the Khwarezmian Empire, the Abbasid Caliphate, the Kingdom of Hungary, the Polish Kingdom. They had done so not through superior numbers or technology, but through superior organization, training, and tactics. This demonstrated that a well-organized, disciplined force could defeat much larger armies if properly led and motivated. A 2003 genetic study found that approximately 8% of men in the former Mongol Empire carry Y chromosome markers indicating descent from a common ancestor who lived roughly 1,000 years ago. The geographic distribution and timeline strongly suggest this ancestor was Genghis Khan. If accurate, this means roughly 0.5% of the world's male population, about 16 million men, are direct patrilineal descendants of Genghis Khan. This extraordinary genetic legacy resulted from Mongol marriage practices. Mongol leaders, including Genghis Khan and his sons, today, their descendants live throughout Asia, often unaware of their ancestry. The Mongol Empire's collapse didn't erase its influence, it dispersed it. The technologies, ideas, governmental systems, and cultural practices that had been concentrated in the Mongol Empire spread to its successor states. China, Russia, Persia, India, and Central Asia all inherited pieces of the Mongol legacy and incorporated them into their own traditions. Modern Mongolia itself is a small country, landlocked between China and Russia, with a population of only about 3 million people. Most Mongolians today are not nomadic herders. For a brief moment in history, a people from one of the world's harshest environments built the largest contiguous land empire ever. They connected east and west, facilitating exchanges that shaped the modern world. They proved that nomadic peoples could not only survive, but dominate settled civilizations. They demonstrated that merit could triumph over birth, that organization could overcome numbers, that adaptability could defeat tradition. Their empire was brutal. Millions died in their conquests. Cities were destroyed. Cultures were disrupted. But they built administrative systems that governed effectively across vast distances and diverse populations. They showed that different religions and cultures could coexist peacefully under competent governance. The Mongol story is ultimately a human story. It began with a boy named Temujin, orphaned and abandoned, who refused to accept his fate. Through intelligence, ruthlessness, and charisma, he united the Mongol tribes. Through military genius and administrative innovation, he built an empire. Through pragmatic adoption of useful practices from conquered peoples, he created a system that could govern the world's largest empire. Yet the Mongol influence persisted in those nations' governments, militaries, cultures, and populations. From the steppes of Mongolia to the palaces of Beijing, from the deserts of Persia to the forests of Russia, from the ruins of Baghdad to the unconquered walls of Vienna, the Mongols left their mark. They changed the world not through cultural superiority or technological advancement, but through organizational genius and the ruthless application of power. They proved that a small nation could dominate the world if led by brilliant commanders and organized effectively. Their empire lasted less than 2 centuries as a unified entity. But their legacy, the Mongol Empire, rose from nothing and conquered everything. It fell apart through internal conflicts and external pressures, but it transformed the world in the process. That transformation, technological, cultural, political, and genetic, remains with us today. The Mongols may be gone, but their legacy lives on in the modern world they helped create. If you found this deep dive into Mongol history fascinating and want to explore what happened next in these regions they conquered, make sure to subscribe to our channel. The story doesn't end here. Russia would rise from Mongol domination to become a great empire itself. Each of these deserves its own detailed exploration. Leave a comment telling us which topic you'd most like to see covered next: the rise of Russia from Mongol rule, the Mughal Empire's golden age, or how the Yuan dynasty's fall shaped Ming China. We're always looking for new stories to tell, new histories to explore. Your comments help us decide what to cover next. Like this video if you enjoyed this journey through Mongol history, and share it with anyone who loves learning about how our world came to be. The Mongols conquered half the known world, connected East and West, and changed human history forever.